Okay, so this is part two of the util drill set from round four of the 2013 TOC. Please watch part one, and at the end of part one, I gave Parker a redo to do for next time. So he has done his homework, and we're going to listen to his redo. Ready whenever you are.
Ready. Cynical and George 2 evidence says that rehab reduces recidivism by significant amount, and that amount outweighs the amount of that deterrence does, which means it's uniquely more important. You've conceded two responses that take out your solvency deterrence that we include every trust and every study, which means there's no sort of self-funding error, and there's a few unpublished studies, which means there's no publishing bias. Now you have conceded the argument at the bottom of the case that says that we need to prefer weighing arguments that specifically have causal points and empirical points, which is what uniquely could draw isolates your arguments have not and no analytic points, which is unique for those arguments. And let's go on the meta weighing arguments. You can at the very top, you can see that meta studies are uniquely that way because they look at overall trends rather than specific analysis, which only my studies are account for. Now let's go on your self-insurance. You say reject meta analysis, but first I doesn't apply to my studies since my biases will apply to all studies that are available. That also takes out your 6 and 7 response. You say you read a meta analysis versus no warrant, just asserts that these other meta analyses are bad and corrects for the problems, but instead not isolate those warrant second side of my argument. Evidence post 8 years by 10 years, which means since it takes into account all meta-analysis, co-opt your argument, and I say recent empirics proof, but first you have not read evidence why recent empirics is key, which means I still outweigh second instead the meta-analysis has so much more data and uniquely outweighs on time frames. Your argument is only 24 months long, which is not enough to check back how effective a program is, especially because especially because it takes a few years to come into effect. You say personal testimony is key, but first is it's a question of they have good rehab. This evidence just example of people misapplying rehab. Second is that this obviously has no control or so things like control for sample size or randomness, which is why studies are important. You say the question of solvency back, but this is just another empirical study. It doesn't have no weighing argument. For a second, it's a question of geographic specificity. It's just California specific. We should for my evidence to refer to the China, United States now. The kind of plan. Actually, no. Now the big scale, small scale debate. Concede that versus second argument. I just say you need expected value. I'm just going to win that my arguments have a larger expected value than yours. You say cognitive biases. My arguments are not about emotional cognitive biases, but they're logical index to your flow to your arguments. You say start off nuclear war, but these arguments are about specific people with a political power, i.e. in policy, in specific policy-making paradigms, or in academia, which we do not have. Even if that's not true, those people are already starving after nuclear war, and if they are not, there's no reason why this round is uniquely key. Now, on my way, I can send the argument that my arguments outweigh a magnitude since they aggregate every single year, which means that our text size are comparatively the same now. That means it's just a question of probability, which I'm way ahead on, which you can see the C point, which says that the extinction is not likely to happen since it happened before, but crime happens all the time, which means it's incredibly likely to happen now. You say now the overcrowding, I can see the uniqueness scenario, which takes out your count plan, which is talked about how we need to remove overcrowding, which means but you can see that overcrowding is not a problem now. The count plan. The counterplan is only linked to overcrowding of that's a framing issue, not linked to the recidivism argument, so the 1 year link is shielded because it's only because it's not a question about recidivism. Now you say mutual exclusive, but that's clearly not the case for the first permutation to both like a crime. If it's not a crime to use drugs more, then we don't have to rehab from you doing it anymore. Second, you have a hidden spending argument in your reads evens 15 evidence, which means that case outweighs here because controls internal link because there's no internal link from spending to any of the argument. Also the supercharged argument for life outweighs on first ability since we can always just get spending back in the future by getting more money, but we can never bring back life. Now the disadvantage, the first disadvantage. First, you've made a huge mistake. Your uniqueness and link evidence are different. You say your unique evidence is about child education. He saw that say the United States economy, but your link evidence about higher education, which has uniqueness and higher education is already super good right now. Second, the case internal link turns your argument since if the people are spending less time in jail, then they're not going to be spending as much money on. 3 is that your argument is not intrinsic. If there's any sort of trade-off right now, they'll get rid of that trade-off because they'll realize that policymakers will realize that they don't want to collapse the entire United States economy, and our education arguments are way underfunded, and they'll realize that collapse is about to happen, which means they'll switch over, which means that even if which means that they're not only not intrinsic, but they're going to proactively solve the disadvantage, which means there's alternate solvency. Now the next disadvantage versus you should say expunging records, but that's not intrinsic to the app. The app arguments are not about rehab. You never heard evidence why expunging is the key to rehab. Second, there's alternate checks to accidents, power plants have check backgrounds, etc. Criminals are low-level staff which you don't have access to the nuclear power plant. Now 3, the pull-up scenario makes no sense because people who listen to United States software are not the ones who are saying that you want to see everyone are a madman as the impact scenario describes. 4, there's no link. Criminals that are getting out of jail, the ones we rehab are drug offenders, not terrorists who want to kill everyone. 5, there's no link to extinction. Your own argument says that it's only likely to have 1 million killed. There's no actual warrant for why extinction is going to happen.
Okay. The last argument would be so much more persuasive if you knew the number of people who commit don't go to jail, or like the amount of crimes you save per year, or like lives you save per year. Because if their impact is 1 million, and let's say you affect 50,000 people per year, you can be like, this means the AF would outweigh the disad in 20 years, and that would assume that the disad happens tomorrow, which is like obviously not going to happen.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
But can I just like do that in the 2AR?
Yeah, definitely. You can stand back to that to the 2AR. So there are a couple of arguments here that I think you could have consolidated with and not made because they were not very good. The first is on the counterplan when you say there's no internal link from spending to anything. I think you should just go for the life outweighs on reversibility.
Okay.
The no internal link from spending to anything was not a good argument because there is an internal link from spending to competitiveness, and also your introduction to it was like, oh, there's a hidden spending disad here. Like nobody needs to know that it's hidden. It doesn't matter, right? I would have been like, the only other thing you can go for is the spending disad, but that doesn't make sense because the lives saved from the AF definitely outweigh the marginal amount of money that you would save. Additionally, the arguments on the spending disad would interact well here, so give the 2AR implicit clash.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think the shielding link was much better, so good job on that. Permutation was fine. Your small scale, big scale weighing was great. You were not good on the third link turn or response, which was the 24-month study. You said meta-analyses, you haven't read recent empirics. Meta-analyses is way longer. 24 months is not long enough. Takes a few years to take into effect. You don't explain exactly what takes a few years to take into effect. So I would have preferred you to say explicitly, like, criminal justice studies need to be longer than 24 months. Criminogenic effects take longer than 2 years to observe. They often take decades.
Yeah.
And my meta-analysis solves.
Mm-hmm.
So I also would prefer you started off with a buzzword, like, I outweigh on magnitude, I outweigh on time frame. So my meta-analyses outweigh on time frame because your study only looks at 2 years, which is not nearly long enough to analyze the actual impacts from criminogenic studies. Oftentimes we observe impacts 10 or 20, 30 years down the line, and you don't look at that, which means you're cherry-picking a subset of the data, a huge reason to prefer the meta-analyses because it expands decades of years. Decades of years is obviously redundant. It expands decades. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, that weighing argument was not good. I think on Del Rosario, you should say I outweigh on sample size and specifically. And did you say that? Because I did not hear it.
I didn't use the word sample size, but I said like studies have things like controls and like large sample sizes.
So why don't you say you outweigh on sample size and controls?
Yeah.
So specifically, so why don't we just redo really quickly the 3, 4, and 5 argument where you go explicitly compare evidence. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the 24-month study, the Jose Cortez study, and the specific to Prop 8 California study. And I want you to use the 5 variables that we have constantly discussed and compare them. Cool.
Yep. On number 3 argument, first you've read no evidence why we need newer evidence and why that's relevant. Second, I went in time frame since your argument is just 24 months long. One meta-analysis are decades long, which is especially important since criminogenic studies having criminogenic effects take decades to take effect rather than just a few months since they take into a lot of account of variables. Now I say personal testimony.
Stop. That was not good. Could be much better. Also, you should say this means I solve for time frame bias. So it should be just way easier, right? Like, on Luke and Bill, you say prefer for recency, but you give no reason. The reason recency is important. Additionally, it's only 24 months long, which means it suffers from time frame bias. Prefer my studies because of time frame. Criminogenic effects takes decades to observe. Yours only looks at for 2 years, which is definitely is cherry picking a subset of the data.
Yep.
And so that warrant was just clearer and more efficient.
Yeah.
With, again, the caveat that I'm slower than you.
Yep. All right. You ready?
Yeah.
On number 3 evidence, you have read no we have evidence why recency is key on the 7th debate. Second side, I went time frame, so you said it's only 24 months long, which is not long enough to check criminogenic effects, especially soon because they have to take decades to take effect. You're just cherry picking the data, so I'm solving for time frame bias now. You say personal testimony is key, but I went sample size and control since yours just a single example. Why I look at a mental analysis that takes into thousands of examples and controls. You say solves best.
Stop. Why is sample size important?
Checks
Reduces
back for
statistical
randomness.
bias. Yeah, reduces the probability that randomness can influence the results.
Yep.
This is important. This is the impacting.
Yeah.
Also, the way you frame the time frame arguments were just not as smooth as the way I had framed it. So work on the order of your sentences. And also, it's not you have cherry-picked the data. It's Lukenbill has cherry-picked the data.
Yeah.
Right? The app didn't tell Lukenbill yo, I want you to specifically look at 24 months for me.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So let's start again at Lukenbill. I'm being a stickler here because once you get this right once, you're going to be so impressive on this debate and people are just going to be screwed. And do you see how there's just the same pattern here? You just say, I outweigh on time frame, one sentence for the warrant for why why time frame is important, and then one sentence to explain what the impact is. So important in the context of that empirical debate. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I outweigh on time frame key in criminogenic studies because it often takes decades to observe the results. Means which means Lukenbill is probably cherry picking a subset of the data. Means that I solve for temporal bias, you don't.
Yep.
Cool.
Makes sense.
Okay. Let's try it again.
On Lukenbill evidence, first you say. On Lukenbill evidence, you have read no evidence why recency is key. So your argument, your weighing argument makes no sense. Second, I want time frame since your study is only 24 months long, which is not long enough to check back for criminogenic effects, which usually take decades to take effect, which means that Lukenbill is probably cherry picking the data. So I solve for time frame bias. Now you're on the testimony key arguments. First, it's just an example of why people implementing rehab in a poor way, but can be implemented well. Second, I went controls and sample size since it might take into account thousands examples with controls, where it's just a single example that checks back for randomness and alternate causality. Now, you say you solve best versus a misacted comparative argument, but just another study. Second, I went geographic specificity. You're just about California, but evidence throughout the entire United States, which is uniquely key because it checks out for alternate causality, culture and crime rates in that specific area.
Yeah, because it checks back for the unique sociocultural variables that could have influenced California. Would be the much more persuasive way to frame it. Also, you don't need two weighing arguments there. I don't know why you're hedging with two. One is enough. Cut out your bad arguments. This is why you have trouble consolidating. It's because you insist on throwing in the shitty one sentence blip that doesn't really do a lot for you. I would specifically then be the only other card you have for you is the California evidence, but that is outweighed on geographic specificity. California definitely has alternate causality that could explain the results, such as the amount of police funding as well as the amount of crime rates that were happening in the surrounding areas at the time. Compare all of that to a study that looks at the entirety of the United States, which means that there is very little probability that if we observed it across the entire U.S., that there would be geographic bias or something like that. Obviously, the way I just did it there was inefficient. Could be more efficient, but specifically mentioning variables should happen faster and more fluidly than the way you just did it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or you also have to be clever and think about specific things California could have been dealing with at the time. It could have been dealing with a specific immigration crisis that impacted it because California is directly linked to the border.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So let's try that one more time.
So, smoothness, consolidate weighing arguments.
Yeah, smoothness, consolidate, stop going for two, go for the best. And you can jab in one sentence, half sentence arguments, right? Your first link turn is Lukenbill. There's no reason why recency is important. Additionally, it definitely suffers from time frame bias because it only looks at 2 years, which is not nearly enough when we're talking about criminogenic effects, which often take decades to observe. Compare that to the meta-analysis, which looked at hundreds of studies for dozens of years, which means it's probably more holistic.
Yeah. That's good.
Cool.
All right. Let's do this. Only Lucanville evidence first year for no reason why your recency is key. Second, I went a time frame since your study is only 24 months long, which is not nearly long enough when criminogenic effects take decades to take effect. Compare that to the meta-analyses, which are taking thousands of studies and you're taking account dozens of years, which means are comparatively better on time frame bias. Now your personal testimony arguments I went on controls since you're a single example, which why my studies have multiple controls, which check back for randomness. Now you say solves, but that's the first mistake comparative argument, just another statistical study. Second, I went on geographic specificity since my specific entire United States, well, you're just California, which means a huge alternative causality to your argument, saying check back for the alternative causality since you're only looking at the socio-cultural effects of California, like the immigration crisis that were occurring at the time.
Okay, the last 3 sentences there were redundant. You could have consolidated all of that into one sentence. You said alternate causality of California 3 different times. It took you 2 sentences before you explained what those alt causes are. So you could have just been like, this checks back for alt causes, like, for example, in California there could have been immigration. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Why don't you practice this and get it perfect? Cool. So for those of you following along at home, Parker did a fantastic job on every part of the util drill set except specifically evidence comparison on the level of the link that he was going for. And so he's going to redo that again for part 3 of this video analysis.